Today we're going to take a look at this coffee grinder right here. This is the Weber Workshop Key, and this is an electric grinder for the home. It's also a $2,000 coffee grinder. And I know what you're thinking, that's absolutely absurd. This is kind of the territory where we're talking about end game coffee grinders. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what is this coffee grinder all about? Who is this coffee grinder for? What does the coffee taste like that's coming out of a product of this magnitude? And do I enjoy my experience with this? Is it a masterpiece or is it more of a gimmick? So let's dive into this. Now, before I do, if you could do me a huge favor, just scroll down on this video, click that little thumbs up, that like button. It would be a huge way to support this channel and tell the YouTube algorithm this is a video worth watching. It would mean the world to me. And while you're down there, let me know in the comments your favorite milk beverage, cortados, lattes, or a piccolo, whatever it might be. Let me know in the comments down below. I'm truly curious. So the key, let's talk about this. This is a fascinating grinder for many reasons and turned a lot of heads when it was announced by Weber Workshops back in 2021. Because again, this is very similar to their HG2, their HG1. It shares the same burr set, the same adjustment system. And for a lot of people, this is desirable because not everybody wants to hand grind their coffee, but some people prefer that conical burr set to a flat burr set that you might find on the EG1, or even save some money because the EG1, well, it's almost twice the price of this grinder. It's fairly expensive, but this grinder, it's beautiful, right? This is the snow. It comes in the onyx as well. And if you're somebody who doesn't like to clean after your coffee equipment, or get the black one. The white one's beautiful. I prefer it, but it gets dirty very easily. It's very thin, it's a little deeper and a little higher, but it's a thin grinder, so it can fit on a bar beside things very easily. I mean, in comparison, here's a Niche Zero. While a little bit taller, it's definitely skinnier. It's deeper, so depending on your cabinet, that could be an issue, but I don't think it will be. And for $2,000, you'd expect a very premium feeling experience. And thankfully, the Key, it has that. It's fully metal. It's got nice wood pieces that are treated well. It's heavy, like everything is really high quality. There's no gaps in the panels, right? There's no shortcuts, there's no plastics. Over here, you've got a little wood piece that pulls out to be a brush. And I think this is really nice. There's a little copper sleeve that can pull open and close. So when it pulls out, it comes out ready to brush any coffee grounds that you would need. And you can slide that back in place. And then you've got something very important on the end here, which is a big selling feature for this grinder, which is their RPM dial. Now, in future videos, I hope to dive into this topic more because this really is an area that we as an industry haven't really talked about a ton, but this is becoming very popular within home grinders and coffee grinders, adjusting the speed at which those burrs spin, which reflects into the profiles and tastes we get from the coffee. And I'm gonna share my experience with this in this video later on, but very nice feature and something we haven't seen on this burr set. And then beside that is the power switch. And this grinder is very quiet. And down at that 30 RPM, you can barely hear this thing. It does get a little bit louder at that 150, but this is still a very quiet grinder as you would expect. But right here, this is really the selling feature of this grinder. This is Weber Workshop's very familiar grind adjustment system you find on the EG1 and the HG2 and HG1. Now, this system uses a 5-micron stepped adjustment system. Something a lot of people aren't aware of, this is actually a stepped grinder. Now, how it works is you lift up this collar here, which then removes the pin locking system for this dial, and you can twist it and lock it back down in place. So each one of those marks there represents 5 microns, which is incredibly small. I think red blood cells are 8 microns. So we're talking very, very small adjustments. The grinder's not gonna lock out of adjustment by mistake. You're not gonna hit this and move it by mistake. It's locked in. So we should probably dive into my experience, my thoughts with this grinder, what I love, good and bad. But first, let's brew a coffee. I'm actually really excited to talk about the coffee this produces because for me, it's very unique. It's fascinating. So when I bought this, I actually thought this would be more similar to like a Niche Zero with a conical burst set, more blended in nature, a lot of texture, a lot of body to those shots, maybe lacking some clarity in exchange. You know, when I bought this for me was that step up from the niche, maybe a little more premium of an experience. It looks beautiful, but it's actually very different for me. For the niche, you've got very textured shots, but this is a very, it's high in clarity, and actually, especially at the low RPMs, it lacks a lot of body. When I'm talking about those words, when I say body, I'm talking about like those ooey, those gooey shots that you would get from very traditional style espresso. This isn't producing that. Now, RPM is playing a big factor here. What we know from RPM is the lower the speed on the coffee grinder, the more uniform it is in its grind distribution. I think this is why we see such great results from a lot of hand grinders, is because we have such a low RPM. But from this grinder, you can bring it right down to 30 RPM. So really you're simulating a hand grinder, if not slower, which is really interesting. Now you can get this up to 150. And like I said, at that 150 range, you start to get more body, a lot less clarity. You're producing a different style of grind distribution, and the results are more niche-like, more traditional conical. But at these low RPMs, the grounds are interesting. Like they don't look uniform, right? They're not like a unimodal grinder, like a flat burr. They look different. And the result is different too. Like the coffee, it lacks that body, but man, does it pop in clarity. And for me, I think this is a grinder that would really excel for a specific person, right? If you have like a decent espresso machine, or like a lever espresso machine, or something with flow control or pressure profiling, this is a grinder that would excel with a machine like that, because you can really push long extractions without getting a lot of bitterness or astringency from those coffees. Now that being said, at that higher RPM, like I mentioned, you will get able to get more traditional conical style shots, and so any machine can be able to pull on this, don't get me wrong, but it is a great machine for people who want to experiment. In my experience at least. So let's quickly talk about the filter coffee that Key produces. And while this isn't a filter coffee focused grinder, it is a $2,000 grinder with low retention, so you'd expect it to do both filter and espresso, especially if this is your only grinder. And it does deliver. While this wouldn't be my filter coffee grinder of choice, it produces great juicy cups of coffee that have good clarity, not quite as much as like a flat burr grinder, but more than something than the Niche Zero. It does still produce a lot of fines in your beds of your filter brewers, but that really hasn't affected the cups terribly. Now let's talk about some pros and cons, because that's obviously a big factor here. What's good, what's not, what has my experience been? Let's start with pros. So this grinder is beautiful, right? It's compact, it looks nice, it's very quiet. That brush feature, the materials used on this feel like you're getting your money's worth. Even putting this beside a P64, while that's a beautiful grinder and some might prefer the looks of that, you can tell there's a incredible build quality on the Weber workshops. There's something about the way that they build these machines that definitely turns heads. It's a centerpiece to a brew bar. The tolerances on this are very tight. For me, out of the box, it was perfectly aligned, at least from what I can tell. Things like even the Magic Tumbler, which is a catch cup that actually releases the bottom of the tumbler so your grounds can fall into the portafilter, as you probably saw me doing earlier, which is also magnetic. It both magnets to the base of this grinder and also magnetizes to the grinder itself. It's a nice feeling experience. I really love that part for sure. But let's talk about some cons, because there's definitely some here. Now, first off, I don't love this. This is an anti-popcorning disc that's kind of feels like an afterthought. This just sits on top of where you feed your beans into the grinder. It helps for sure, but like it just doesn't fit with the rest of this grinder. Like everything feels very premium in this. I don't love that. I also don't love how hard it can be to adjust the grind setting. Depending on, at least this is my grinder, it can be a very hard thing to adjust. Now, for most people, this won't be a huge issue, but it is something to consider depending on, I guess, your strength. Like, do you need to be strong to adjust a coffee grinder? I don't know. But it's definitely something I noticed. I've never had an issue adjusting grind size before, and this was a little tough. Now, the other thing, speaking of grind size, the burr set itself produces fantastic quality grounds. It's a Moser 83mm conical. Weber Workshop coats their grinder burr, and they say that they season it as well. Now for me, this is very confusing. It definitely is a burr set that still needs to be seasoned regardless of what they communicate in the purchasing process. Now, a couple other things to be addressed. I've been on forums and looked on Reddit to other experiences people have been having to ensure that my perspective isn't linear, but I'm addressing the issues that the community is facing. Now, I can only speak to my experiences, but I did notice some people having some issues with their early units, mine being one of the first out there, by the way. People had some marks on the top of their grinder, especially the white models. I can't speak to the black one, and there were some paint defects. Now, this was a minor issue, and again, I talked to Douglas. He said they're already addressing it, and so by the time you're watching this video, this is probably a non-issue, but again, because it's a review, thought it was worth addressing. So, hey guys, Editor Kyle here. Originally in this video, I recorded saying that I had no issues with stalling or hesitations, as I had heard some friends who had those issues. But update, since recording this about a week ago, I have had some issues. This coffee is a coffee from Onyx. This is a Puente Village. It's a light roasted Colombian. And up to this point, nothing has really hesitated the motor, but this coffee has. So, you know, I've just basically been lucky to this point. But I'll show you exactly what happens. It doesn't stall where the motor stops, but it slows down at its lowest RPM. Now, if I pour this coffee in here, and I turn this on, this is at 30, as you can see. Oh, now it's at 30. And I turn this on. You can see it has to grab. There's some popcorn in there too. So quick thought with that. Obviously, popcorning has been an ongoing issue that I didn't mention in this video, and also that concerns me. You know, for a grinder of this price, I definitely wouldn't want it to hesitate. I'm not really grinding at 30 anyways, but you would expect that wouldn't be an issue. Now, something that I'm kind of neutral on here is its built-in wire mixer. Now, this is attached to the inner burr, and as the burr grinds the coffee, it spins this little needle here to mix those coffee grounds and break down any clumps. I think it's a really unique idea, but it hasn't been super functional for me. This might just be a personal thing, but I've always had to use the WDT or mixing the coffee grounds to help break down those clumps even more for best distribution. It doesn't hit the whole magic tumbler, and so it only really mixes a certain part of it. Definitely, if you don't have a WDT tool, this is better than nothing. If you do have one, I would still recommend using that WDT to break down those clumps. Again, owning this for over a month now, I've really taken my time to address this grinder and really familiarize myself with it. Now, I have mixed feelings on the workflow of this grinder. It both is really satisfying with magnets and nice feeling materials, but awkward when it comes to grind adjustments, but also pouring the beans into the grind chamber. Now, there's not a ton of space here, as you can see, so depending on your dosing cup, which Weber provides this little tiny one with a spray bottle, by the way, which is awesome. This one is definitely designed for this grinder, which is nice. And also Weber has like their bean cellars that you can store coffee beans in. Now, this one's nice and thin and it works really well for this grinder. You can even sit it on top here if you want to. But if you have something a little bit bigger, a different dosing cup, it's not great. It's very awkward to pour your beans in here. I wouldn't say it's a reason not to buy this grinder unless that's a big deal to you. So let's wrap this up. The Weber Workshop Key. Is this a grinder that you should consider? Is it a grinder worth the $2,000 price tag? And is it a modern espresso masterpiece? As I've shared so much in this video, this is a very niche grinder. If you're somebody who wants to brew very modern style espresso, who has a Slayer style machine or something with like flow control or pressure profiling or like a 𝙇𝙞𝙣 or a lever machine, this might be a grinder worth considering. While it's super expensive, there really isn't a ton of options when it comes to a build quality like this with the adjustability in RPMs on an 83mm conical. Is this for everybody? Definitely not. If somebody knows exactly what they want like a Unimoto style burr or they want a high textured coffee, this is probably not the grinder for you. You might be better going off with something like the P64 or going with Weber's EG1. It's a nice electric grinder. It's got great build quality, but I see a little bit of competition and almost tribalism between flat burrs and conical burrs. This isn't a flat burr grinder. It's not trying to emulate it. It is its own thing. But if you kind of want like a hybrid grinder and something unique, something beautiful, something smaller, whatever your case might be, this is definitely a great conical burr set. Just keep in mind, it's not a traditional conical in the profiles that it produces. It's not going to produce those very thick bodied espressos, at least in my experience this far. And I've brewed hundreds of coffees on this at this point. Mine being the first in Canada and one of the first in North America. I was excited to see that mine had no issues. The alignment was perfect, the paint was perfect, everything about mine was good. And I do believe that Weber Workshop has designed a beautiful grinder here. It's really nice to use, except for some quirks that are personal, subjective opinions in that. But I do want to know, what do you think? I'm sure you've got lots of opinions on your take on the Weber Workshop Key. Do you have one of these? Do you ever plan on looking at something this expensive? Is $2,000 way too much money to spend improvement on a coffee grinder, or is it enough? Let me know down in the comments below. I'll be reading every single one and responding to as many as possible. Now, if you've gotten this far in the video, well, first of all, you're amazing and I love you. Let me know by writing major keys down in the comments below. It would let me know that people actually watch these videos in their entirety. Also, like this video if you enjoyed it or learned anything about the Weber Workshop key. It would be a huge help. Subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, winning coffee gear that I review, if you want to join our Discord, I have access to giveaways. You can check that out down in the description down below. All right, I love you guys all so much. We'll see you guys all in the next video. Peace.